Hello, everybody. I am here to do the second episode of the series of episodes that go along with The Way with Children, Ancient Wisdom for Leading Modern Young People. It is essentially a version of the Tao Te Ching, but specifically directed to or written for parents, people who are in my business, those who practice in the mental health business, with adolescents and young people, teachers, school teachers, high school teachers, any kind of teachers, coaches, mentors, anybody who works with young people. I did the first episode. That you can find that on my channel. Go see it. It's called Alternatives. Like it, make some comment or something like that. That's always very useful to me and very welcomed, and I appreciate it a lot. I'll actually answer as many of the comments as I can. So today we're doing episode 2 of The Way with Children, and it is section 36. I explained to everybody last time that I'm not doing this in order. I'm not doing 1, 2, 3, 4 all the way to 81. There's going to be 81 sections. I'm doing it sort of, a combination of, because it's the one I want to do right now, but also in a way that sort of introduces the concepts that are kind of throughout the 81 sections in a intentional sort of putting a foot in a little bit at a time kind of a way, or something along those lines. So anyway, this episode is called Feelings, in the section 36, Feelings. I'm going to just read it first, and then I'm going to explain it as well as I can. I'm not even here to claim that I understand the Tao Te Ching the same from one day to the next. I wrote the dang book after the fashion of the Tao Te Ching, but I understand things differently. Even though I remember writing particular words, I understand them differently now. This is not the sort of book to read and just kind of go, that was a good book, and then go to the next book. You have to revisit it. It's something that is to sort of inform day in and day out the motions that you have with other people. So when you start to explore the Tao, you'll begin to notice it more. You'll begin to see other adults and the way they work with children in what seem to be mystical, secret ways, and they just get cooperation and nobody knows how or why. You'll start to notice how and why. And it'll become a little bit more clear and a little bit easier. But we'll go ahead and go into feelings. The teacher who feels punctured must once have been overblown. The leader who feels vulnerable must once have been armed. The instructor who feels disrespected must once have been excessively proud. The parent who feels cheated must once have felt meriting. Herein is the light of wisdom. What you thought was the child's proclivity to offend was in fact your active disposition to be offended. If you would shrink their anger, expand their vision. If you would weaken their sting, strengthen their heart. If you would have them let go, show them what to pick up. If you would take their resistance, give them something toward which to respond. Herein is the light of subtle insight, that the soft and weak overcome the hard and strong. Instruments of sharpness are accessed by a leader of Tao as often as a fish chooses to be out of water. All right. Fish do choose to be out of water every now and then. It's not here's a little illustration of it. Not a common thing. They don't stay out of water for very long. So instruments of sharpness, it's not saying they ought not to ever be accessed, but only as often as a fish would be out of water. In other words, you're way down a path, way already down a path if you got to bring out instruments of sharpness. What I mean by that is, like punishments and confrontations and getting in the middle of or getting in the face of or cracking down, that kind of thing with young people around you. If it's come to that, the actual problem happened a long time ago. So to roll the clock back and sort of prevent that problem or contribute to the prevention of that problem. Some problems are going to happen anyway that don't really have to do with us directly as the one who's in the role of leadership at the time. It may have had to do with somebody else. But certainly the problem isn't because of what's going on presently. That's the manifestation of something that's been building up for a while. So what if we caught it earlier? Well, here's a way we can catch difficulties between us and children earlier, is what is at the beginning of this section, as opposed to what I sort of talked a little bit about there, about the end, instruments of sharpness. So way up here, go back to kind of break this down. The teacher who feels punctured must once have been overblown. And by the way, I go through here and say the teacher, the leader, the instructor, the parent. All of these can be interchangeable. I could just as easily say the parent who feels punctured, the leader who feels punctured, the instructor who feels punctured. Since they're interchangeable terms, sometimes I literally use all of those terms in one section. But often this does have to do with parents, especially if the difficulty has to do with long-term interactions. A school teacher will have a kid for an hour during 5 days of the week for part of a year, and obviously parents were with their kiddos all the time. So when you're reading this or when you're listening to this, just think in terms of this applies to all of those categories of leaders of young people, and might more deeply apply to parents. Also want to throw out there, no parent is perfect. This walking through the principles of this book is not to condemn anybody. It's to just help inform what goes on next. So, believe me, no judgment. Okay, feelings. The teacher who feels punctured must once have been overblown. It's also translated in versions of the Tao Te Ching. If you feel punctured, you must once have been a bubble. So, just think about that. If I'm not a bubble, and I get punctured, I don't feel punctured like a bubble would feel punctured. A bubble feels punctured because it popped, it exploded. But if I'm not being a bubble, and the same kind of action that would otherwise puncture me happens, it certainly doesn't have the result of what happens when you puncture a bubble. When we are overblown with ourselves, and there's a myriad of ways we can be overblown. Somebody could be excessively angry as a person. You're a parent, you're a teacher, you just kind of got this edge. You're an angry person. People, maybe your spouse at home, why are you angry? Well, it's real easy to feel like you're just being disobeyed, disrespected, and people are trying to incite you all the time when you go to teach class. These teenagers are just always getting on my nerves. Well, some teachers don't feel punctured. Some parents don't feel punctured. Some instructors don't feel punctured. Some mentors don't feel punctured. Why is that? It's not because the action of puncturing isn't happening. It's because they're not overblown. Okay. The leader who feels vulnerable must once have been armed. Now, Brene Brown talks about vulnerability. It's a little bit of a different definition. The leader who feels vulnerable, uh, open for attack, must once have not felt vulnerable because of the armaments that they carried, because of the blockades that they put up. So if I have made myself strong, or made myself feel strong, or even seem strong, because of the compensative sort of apparatuses I have put in place in my life, I'm kind of loud, or I'm boisterous, or I'm super, super quiet as a protection, as a wall of protection against people who might otherwise win in an attack. Or I'm coming out with the sword, and I'm going to be the one who wins. And my armaments are already pointing outward, so you better not mess with me. When we feel vulnerable, it's because we've been living in that armed way. There are people who don't feel vulnerable because they actually are vulnerable. They're practicing vulnerability in a genuine way. They haven't been armed. So for them, vulnerability seems like just a natural thing. They probably wouldn't even know what it means to feel like vulnerable and in danger because they haven't had to defend themselves, or haven't decided to defend themselves, or they haven't built up armaments. There's a lot of reasons why people may have built up armaments and now feel vulnerable, now feel open to attack. The attacks might look the same, going after a person who is armed and now feels, by not having the armament, feels vulnerable, and other people who stand in this vulnerable / invulnerable place. By the way, that's how I define genuine vulnerability is invulnerable, meaning it just is. You just are. You're not vulnerable to attacks because you have made yourself just so accepting, as it were. The attack doesn't have the same quality in terms of how it affects you. So the leader who feels vulnerable must once have been armed. The instructor who feels disrespected must once have been excessively proud. Nothing is more powerful to the inciting of the resistance of a young person than for an adult to expect to be treated with respect because they're the adult. It's just insane, actually, to hold that viewpoint as an adult. And I hope somebody in the comments asks me about it. Well, wait a minute, shouldn't young people respect their elders? Depends on the elders. So if I feel like I deserve respect just because I'm standing there, so I'm an adult, I deserve respect. All you young people, you need to respect me. I have it in my brain somehow, somewhere, that regardless of my own qualities, regardless of what I have done for these people, or regardless of how I see them as people, or not, regardless of anything about me, their job is to respect me. Well, that actually is excessively proud. That there's something extremely sort of almost dishonest about that. You just have to respect me. So there, take that. It's not a thing. Young people might get along better in life if they respect people that are farther down the road than them, because that will be helpful to them in life. But to try to help a young person understand that respecting, older people is helpful to them, kind of how they walk in life, that's fine. But to feel like I have to be respected. I've been excessively proud. And I am offended by things that young people do when somebody else might not be offended. The parent who feels cheated must once have felt meriting. Some people don't feel cheated when certain things aren't done at the right time, in the right way, in the right order, with gratitude. They don't feel cheated because they don't feel like they merited that in the first place. So a particular action could be done by a young person, and an overblown person is going to feel punctured, offended in some way. An armed person is going to, especially if the nature of the attack leaves them sort of unexpectedly unarmed, they're going to feel offended. An excessively proud person, upon even slight disrespects, going to be offended. And somebody who feels, meriting all the time and doesn't get what they are expecting, especially from young people, are going to feel cheated out of something, if nothing else, how they should have been treated. So these are 4 ways of describing a similar thing. If I feel offended, it's because I have built up in me over time the sort of person who is offended by particular things. Because 2 people can observe the same scenario. One could be completely offended and the other one not offended at all. Why is that? So the nature of the offendedness is actually separate from the nature of the offense, especially in the realm of young people and older people. Have you ever seen a young parent undone by a 2-year-old? I have, because I have been one of those parents. So, we could say, dang, those teenagers, that's really, those are the ones that give you a hard time. There are people who get frustrated and just can't take it because of what their 2-year-old is doing. They're literally called the terrible twos. Am I seeing a person as a person if I cooperate with acknowledging that the description of them as terrible has any legitimacy at all? Probably not. And the things that this little person does as it affects me is basically saying that the nature of the relationship is one in which the 2-year-old is in charge. That's not about the 2-year-old at all. That's about the parent. Okay. Some parents are even offended at 2-year-olds who have no intention of purposely hurting your feelings, puncturing you in some way. So herein is the light of wisdom. What you thought was the child's proclivity to offend was in fact your active disposition to be offended. Okay. That goes far beyond parenting or leading young people. That's something that has to do with people's relationships laterally as well, their peers and people's relationships with their parents. I can be offended in a lot of scenarios. I can be offended about society, and I can also be offended about what children around me are doing. In this country, in this culture, and in a lot of cultures, there's this belief. The belief is, I do A, and it creates B in you. So it's like saying, here's me, and somebody does something offensive means that they just pour offense into me. And there, see, I'm offended. You just hurt my feelings. You just made me mad. You just embarrassed me. Kids are great at embarrassing us. But in reality, if somebody has an active disposition to be offended, or if any of us are ever offended, this is what's really happening. There's the third jar. So the offender, if you want to call it that, throws behavior into the world. Probably near me, probably even kind of at me. But I have to pick that jar up and pour it into myself in order to be offended. Somebody cannot just directly offend me. It doesn't happen that way. We participate in being offended as the offendee. Now, there's a lot of details around that. There's abuse and there's, actual people being victimized in heinous ways. We could describe that aspect as well and spend some time specifically on that. But for now, just kind of stick with sort of your generic day-to-day offendedness that people might have. That's what I'm talking about. If I refuse to be offended, or if I have a disposition where I am not offended, then nobody can offend me. If I am not overblown, not armed, not excessively proud, and not feeling meriting, then I will not be punctured. I will not be vulnerable to attack. I will not feel disrespected, and I won't feel cheated. So, behavior that seems puncturing or attacking or disrespecting or cheating doesn't feel that way to me. And then my behavior in return is coming from an unoffended person. An unoffended person responds. And they have the ability to respond intentionally. They have the ability to respond in ways that they sort of want to, not reactive. If I feel punctured, my reactivity is part of this idea of having been punctured, and I'll come at the person who has done this offensive thing. So the light of wisdom, what you thought was the child's proclivity to offend was in fact your active disposition to be offended. What you thought was the other person's proclivity to offend was in fact your active disposition to be offended. This is interesting ground, whether we're talking about being a leader of young people or in any context. To offend someone is their responsibility and mine as the offender, and them as the offendee. Again, if we get into really heinous things like victimization, there's more things to say about that. But if I have a car and I'm really, really connected to that car, and I have a thing for cars and for my property, and some punk kid parks next to mine and opens his door rapidly because he's laughing with his friends who are getting out of the car with horrible music going on, and they put a dent in my car. Well, I'm offended by that, and I'm upset, and I'm going to go talk about my anger about their disrespect and their lack of care for other people's property and all sorts of things. And if I'm offended at the time, then now what I'm doing is inviting them to be offended too. I'm not making them offended, but it's not likely that they're just going to be okay with that. So now we have this problem that's going to start escalating. Now, same car, same scenario, same kids, same music, same laughing, same lack of concern for other people's property, same everything except the person's connection to their car or to material things or to the idea that their things are connected to them in such a way that if people disrespect the things, they're also disrespecting them. Like, there's none of that going on. It's just a car. And the kiddo bangs the car with their door. And now suddenly, this goes back to the episode 1 of The Way with Children and go to alternatives, now suddenly there are myriad alternatives for this adult in terms of the direction they can take, the action they would take, that would not include inviting those teenagers to now be incited into anger or even more behavior that's disrespectful. And it typically looks a little bit different too, and sometimes extremely different. Maybe that adult would calmly walk up and say, "Oh, hey guys, I don't know if you noticed or not, but you dented the door there. When you got out. I was a kid too. I get it. You guys got a lot going on, and I'm just wondering what we could do to remedy this. Perhaps I should have parked farther away if I was that interested in my car not getting a ding in it. But hey, what do you think?" Now, they could all say, "Shut up," and walk off. And no really good, satisfactory result came of the lack of confrontation with these teenage kids. Well, I could be unoffended about that too. If one walks unoffendedly, a lot of things can happen. And they've learned to choose to live at ease, and you just get the car fixed. Young people have different filters than adults do. Adults have embedded long-term emotional difficulties. Young people's emotional difficulties are budding, and they're learning some of it from us. So it's actually, even though it's not sort of, they're not as socially adept. They're climbing out of a car with music and being boisterous, which an adult probably wouldn't do. But it doesn't mean that an adult's sort of personal issues aren't extraordinarily deeper than what these kids are doing. What if it's a man in the car and it just so happened that he was at dinner with the woman that he was stepping out on his wife with. So we have somebody who's participating in a heinous scenario, and he's upset that kids have hit his door with their car door. At what point do you say all of us are in the realm of offendor, and all of us are in the realm of possibly being offended? And the dance between people are informed, the dances between people are informed both by people trying to be less offensive and people trying to be less offended. And if people are really, really good at being unoffended, people can offend all day long and they won't absorb it as an offense. And if people are really, really good at being offendable, people might not even do things trying to offend, and this person will be offended all day long. If I have a offendable disposition, you can't not offend me usually. So, okay, there you go. If you would shrink their anger, expand their vision. If you would shrink their anger, expand their vision. One might think that to address a child's anger is to directly address the child's anger. Set up a consequence that's directly related to their behavior when they're in anger. Or figure out a way, and it's probably not going to happen at the time of their being all crazy upset, but maybe at a later time, figure out a way to help them see life differently than maybe what they do currently. Go to the aquarium. The list could go on and on and on. How can I expand this child's vision? Whether I'm a teacher, mentor, parent, not just go after their anger. So if one person is angry and another person is confronting that anger, you have what's called a battle. If this person is angry and this person isn't and won't be offended, this person it's almost like they're absorbing the blows of the anger, but they're not compounding it by popping anything back. So it's like this person is being a pillow wall. So they're a wall and they're just like full of pillows. And this person is throwing a ball. Well, if this person is angry throwing a ball and this person has no pillows or padding, that ball hits them, bounces right back. So if I'm throwing a ball at a wall and it bounces right back, I don't have to do extra work. I just chuck that ball again. So I do something, somebody reacts, I feel justified in what I just did. Boom, I'm just going to do it again. But if this person is a pillow wall and this person throws the ball, it goes poop, sunk, poop, sunk. And the angry person or the hurt person or the emoting person, the offended person, has to make effort to go over, pick the ball up again, throw it again. After a while, they begin to recognize their own pattern because you're not participating in it as the pillow wall. We bring people into a more honest realm when we're not participating in their justification of their dishonesty. And if they're doing it with us, then that's called collusion. Both people are doing it. That's insanity, and that's a whole other thing. We'll talk about that some other time. So if you would shrink their anger, expand their vision. The two things seem completely disconnected. And there's a lot of things that's disconnected from anger that you could do as opposed to just directly dealing with confronting the anger. Contain the behavior, make sure everybody's safe and all that kind of thing. But, now we're going to have to just sit down and talk about that outburst. Well, just maybe not. Expand their vision. And what might happen to their anger? If you would weaken their sting, strengthen their heart. What? Those two things don't seem to be connected either. This kid is annoying. Stings all the time. He's a little bit late all the time. Misses curfew all the time. It's just he's a stinging person. Sarcastic. Disrespectful. What's going on in his heart? What battle is he fighting or is she fighting in her heart? How can I help strengthen their heart as opposed to directly confront the fact that they're stinging? So it seems like expanding their vision and strengthening their heart are disconnected from directly addressing anger and sting. But they are deeply connected. If my heart is strong and I have an expanded vision, I have a lot less to be angry about, and I will be less inclined to sting. If you would have them let go, show them what to pick up. Stop that. Stop that. Knock it off. Stop it. Sit down. Be quiet. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. If water is flowing, let's say in a irrigation ditch or a small stream, and you just try to dam it up, we all know what happens. The water figures out where to go somewhere, unless we plan on making a dike and a complete reservoir or a lake. The water will go around whatever impediments we put in front of it. So if it's all about trying to stop their behavior directly, get them to stop it, to let go of whatever their behavior is, knock it off, stop doing that, let go of what it is that you're doing, we need to give them something to pick up. Dig a trench for the water to go. Don't just try to block it. They're a human being. You don't like being stifled as a person. So if you, Stop doing what you're doing, young person. Change your behavior. Have I sufficiently helped them understand what sort of things to pick up? Because in the act of picking up a particular thing, often by necessity, you have to let go of something. There's this idea of a rite of passage or of a hero's journey. Hero's journey is basically, in all societies, somebody leaves the village, goes out and learns things, and comes back as a hero to the village. And there's a lot of different versions of this. But what happens if somebody is doing this journey is they are picking things up, they're learning things, and they're letting go of things, letting go of fear, letting go of nervousness, letting go of anxiety, letting go of anger, letting go. They come back to the town, the village, a completely different person. And the act of picking up has been powerful in effectuating letting go. So you can watch Frozen again and just concentrate on letting go, or you can help them know what to pick up, inspire them to know what to pick up. And then things just kind of happen a little bit more automatic in terms of them letting go. If you would take their resistance, give them something toward which to respond. Very similar concept there. We invite somebody's... in my video podcast, Engaging Agency, I talk about this. Go look at that one. We can incite resistance in a young person, or we can engage the positive use of their agency. Agency is as defined by my ability to see people as people or as objects, and it's connected to the kind of decisions that I make. So I can engage a young person's agency by helping give them something toward which to respond. What are they interested in? What do they feel toward naturally as a person? Not just... Again, knock that off. Stop resisting what I'm trying to tell you. Hey, there's this. This flows over here. Is this cool? Are you interested in this? Is there? If you help somebody flow, you don't have to block them on the sides because they're flowing. All right. Give them something toward which to respond. Herein is the light of subtle insight. The soft and weak overcome the hard and strong. In this book and in the Tao Te Ching, there's a lot of that kind of language. The hard is overcome by the weak. When he says weak and soft, it's not necessarily how we would define weakness. Somebody could be weak in their ability not to be angered all the time. So it's not that. It's if I am confident in my inner strength, I don't have to portray strength. If I am confident in my balance, I don't have to portray that I'm this very balanced person. I just am. And just being is not defined by weak or strong, but the word weak is used here to denote something that's not trying to overcome something else. Same with soft, actually. With soft, I just described this pillow wall idea. That softness just takes the blow of the energy of the offendedness and doesn't bounce it right back with its own offendedness. So softness invites and tranquilizes often. But it doesn't mean that boundaries aren't held. But I can hold a boundary with a child while seeing them as a person or while seeing them as an object, whether they're my child or my student or the client in a program where I work. Instruments of sharpness are accessed by a leader of Tao as often as a fish chooses to be out of water. So, if I am puncturable but don't feel punctured because I'm not overblown, vulnerable but don't feel vulnerable because I'm not armed, disrespectable but don't feel disrespected because I'm not excessively proud, can be cheated but don't feel cheated because I don't feel meriting, and I do not have the disposition to be offended, and I do things like expand their vision and strengthen their heart and show them what to pick up and give them something with which to respond, as opposed to just directly addressing anger, their sting, or insisting that they stop doing what they're doing in terms of letting go of certain behaviors, or creating resistance in them. I probably am not going to have to access instruments of sharpness. Punishment, extra boundaries, censures. I'm probably not going to have to do all of that. Might not even come up. So I choose to go to that aspect of being a leader of young people as often as a fish wants to be out of water, which is not all that often. Sometimes needs to happen, not all that often, and not all that necessary either, if other things are more important to me than my feelings as an adult. Okay, so here's the assignment for this episode, for this section. Think of something, a scenario, that is rather offensive to you. And then track somebody down that you know full well, or you suspect because of maybe how things that they've said or whatever, you kind of have a good idea that the same scenario is not something that is offensive to them. And go ask them why. Try to figure out how is it that they do that. How is it that they're not bugged by that, or angered by that, or hurt by that? Just go ask. Now, you may find that the opposite is true as well. There's things that don't bug you that completely undo them. But just explore that and go to more than one person. Such thing offends me. It doesn't seem to bug them. I'm going to go to my neighbor. Hey, this sort of thing doesn't seem to bother you. How is that? Talk to me about that. Then write down what they say. So write down 3 or 4 things that undo you, that you're offended by, that you know you're offended by. Track somebody down, whether it's the same person who's unoffended by those same 4 things, or 4 people. 4 different people is going to be a more powerful exercise for you. So go to 4 people. You're not offended by this particular thing. It's not that you think it's fine or good or not bad, but you're not offended by it. You're not undone by it. Why? How? Teach me. And then write down what they say. And then do that again and again and again. And maybe that information will help you be less offended by it. So, in the world of adults, working with kiddos, if we are unoffendable, we will get places with them that we otherwise would never, ever get. And we would be having them as the priority instead of our feelings. All right. Thanks. Till next time.